March 15, 1944. High above the rolling Italian countryside, the air trembled with the distant rumble of aircraft engines. Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. led his squadron of red-tailed P-47 Thunderbolts through scattered clouds at 25,000 feet, escorting American bombers toward targets in Austria. The German pilots waiting to intercept them had been briefed to expect another routine engagement against American escort fighters. They had no idea that the men piloting these particular aircraft would forever change the course of aerial combat in the European theater. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What unfolded that day and in the months that followed would not only challenge military doctrine, but shatter deeply held prejudices about who could excel in the demanding arena of aerial warfare. The morning briefing at Ramitelli Airfield had begun before dawn. The pilots of the 332nd Fighter Group, better known as the Tuskegee Airmen, gathered in the operations tent, their faces illuminated by dim yellow light as Captain Lawrence McKinney traced the planned bomber route on a large wall map. "Gentlemen, our B-17 friends are hitting the aircraft factory near Vienna today," McKinney said, his voice carrying the weight of responsibility. "The Luftwaffe has been hitting our bomber formations hard lately. 8th Air Force lost 79 bombers over Berlin last week. Each one had a crew of 10 men. Lieutenant Charles Jamison raised his hand. "What kind of opposition can we expect, sir?" McKinney nodded grimly. "Intelligence reports heavy Messerschmitt 109 and Focke-Wulf 190 concentrations in the area. The Germans know these factories are crucial. They'll defend them with everything they've got." A murmur rippled through the assembled pilots. They understood what was at stake. Not just the mission, but their very reputation. As the first African-American fighter pilots in the United States Army Air Forces, they carried an extraordinary burden. Back home in America, high-ranking officers and politicians still openly questioned whether black men possessed the reflexes, intelligence, and courage necessary for combat flying. Many had actively sought the program's failure. Colonel Davis stepped forward, his presence immediately commanding attention. At 6 feet tall with perfect posture, Davis had graduated from West Point. Despite enduring 4 years of silence, none of his white classmates had spoken to him except on official business. "This will be our 16th bomber escort mission," Davis said, his voice measured and deliberate. "So far, we haven't lost a single bomber to enemy aircraft. That record stands alone in this theater, and we're going to keep it that way. The eyes of our nation are upon us. Each time we fly, we're not just fighting the Germans. We're fighting for our right to fight." The pilots nodded solemnly. They knew their performance would either validate or condemn not just themselves, but generations who might follow. First, Lieutenant James Wiley spoke up. "Colonel, the German pilots, do they know who they're up against when they see our red tails?" A thin smile crossed Davis's face. "Intelligence suggests they're learning. Captured German documents show they initially thought we were inexperienced replacement pilots. They deliberately targeted our formations. Now reconnaissance photos show they're starting to avoid the red tails entirely. But that information isn't widely disseminated among their ranks. Many German pilots still see our markings and think they've found easy prey." "Their mistake," someone muttered from the back of the room. Davis continued with the mission details. The fighters would climb to 25,000 feet, rendezvous with the bombers over the Adriatic Sea, and escort them to the target and back. The entire mission would require over 7 hours of flight time, pushing the limits of their fuel reserves and their physical endurance in the unpressurized cockpits where temperatures dropped well below freezing. As the briefing concluded, the pilots filed out to prepare their aircraft. Lieutenant William Thompson fell into step beside Lieutenant Harold Brown, both men part of the same flight element. "My girl's running smooth after that engine change," Thompson said, referring to his Thunderbolt. "Crew chief says she's pulling an extra 75 horsepower on the test stand." Brown nodded appreciatively. "You'll need it if we tangle with those Focke-Wulfs. I saw what they did to Baker's squadron last week." Thompson's expression darkened. "I heard the Germans have a special squadron, all aces, designated just to hit our bomber formations." "Jagdgeschwader 54, Brown confirmed. "Some of their pilots have over 100 victories, each one marked on their tail fins like notches on a gun." As the early morning light spilled across the airfield, mechanics were already busy preparing the massive P-47 Thunderbolts. Each aircraft weighed more than 7 tons fully loaded, powered by a 2,000-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine. Unlike the more nimble Messerschmitts, the P-47s were bruisers, heavily armed with 8 50-caliber machine guns and capable of absorbing tremendous punishment while delivering devastating firepower. Master Sergeant Wesley Williams supervised the arming of Colonel Davis's aircraft, carefully checking each of the 8 machine guns. 6,000 rounds total, Colonel, he reported as Davis approached. 750 per gun, alternating armor-piercing, incendiary, and tracer every 5th round. Davis ran his hand along the aircraft's fuselage, feeling the smoothness of the metal skin. How's she feeling today, Sergeant? Oil pressure's perfect. Supercharger tested fine. She'll take you there and back, sir. Williams hesitated, then added quietly, My cousin's a waist gunner on one of those B-17s. I'd appreciate it if you'd bring him home. Davis met the sergeant's eyes. That's why we're here. Across the Atlantic, at Luftwaffe headquarters in Berlin, General Major Adolf Galland reviewed the daily intelligence reports with growing concern. As general of the fighter arm, Galland was responsible for defending German airspace against the increasingly devastating Allied bombing campaign. The latest production figures sat on his desk, stark evidence of Germany's increasingly desperate situation. The Americans sent 700 bombers against Frankfurt yesterday, his aide reported. We shot down 28 but lost 36 fighters and 22 pilots. Galland's expression remained impassive, but inwardly he felt the weight of the imbalance. American factories were producing 16,000 aircraft per year to Germany's 3,000. More critically, while Germany struggled to replace experienced pilots, the Americans seemed to have an endless supply. What about these reports of the bomber group that never loses aircraft? Galland asked, tapping a folder on his desk. The ones escorted by fighters with red tails. Major Kurt Bühligen, one of Germany's leading aces with more than 112 aerial victories, leaned forward. We initially thought they were simply lucky. Now it appears more systematic. They fly differently, more disciplined, more focused on bomber protection rather than pursuing kills. Galland considered this information. American pilots are typically aggressive, seeking personal glory through victory counts. These ones show unusual restraint. Do we know which group they are? The intelligence officer cleared his throat uncomfortably. Our sources indicate they are from a segregated Negro unit, sir. The Americans call them the Schwarze Vogelmenschen, the Black Birdmen. A skeptical murmur ran through the assembled officers. Major Erich Schmidt spoke what many were thinking. Surely this cannot be correct. The Americans wouldn't allow Negroes to fly complex fighter aircraft. They lack the technical aptitude and fighting spirit for such demanding combat. Nevertheless, Galland replied, something explains their unusual success rate. I want special attention paid to this unit. Have our best pilots evaluate their tactics and capabilities. He tapped the production charts again. We cannot afford to lose any more aircraft through underestimating our opponents. As the meeting concluded, Galland held back Major Günther Rahl, the 3rd highest scoring fighter ace in history, with 275 confirmed victories. Günther, what do you make of these reports? Galland asked once they were alone. Rahl considered carefully before answering. If true, we have been operating under false assumptions about American capabilities. Our racial theories may have led us to a significant tactical error. Galland nodded grimly. A possibility our leadership would be reluctant to accept. But the numbers do not lie. Monitor this situation personally. If there are weaknesses to exploit, find them. If there are strengths we must counter, identify those as well. Neither man voiced what both were thinking, that at this stage of the war, with resources dwindling and Allied production soaring, even perfect tactical understanding might not be enough. At 25,000 feet, the air was crystalline and bitterly cold. Lieutenant William Thompson could see his breath fogging inside his oxygen mask as he maintained position off Colonel Davis's right wing. The bomber formation appeared ahead. 72 B-17 flying fortresses in precise boxes, their contrails etching white lines against the deep blue sky. Thompson keyed his microphone. "Red 1, this is Red 3. Bombers at 12 o'clock. Right on schedule." "Roger that," Davis responded. "All planes, standard escort formation. Blue flight, take high cover at 28,000. Yellow flight, drop down to 23,000. Red flight with me." As the fighters moved into position, the bomber crews noticed their arrival. A radio call came through. "Red Tails, this is Badger Lead. Sure is nice to see you, fellows." The word's out that nobody gets lost when the Red Tails are around. Davis maintained his professional demeanor. "Badger Lead, we'll be with you all the way to the target and back. Keep your formation tight." The massive aerial armada continued toward Austria, the bomber's four-engine drone mixing with the deeper rumble of the fighter's radial engines. From the ground, they would appear as mere specks, but their combined firepower was staggering. Over 950 caliber machine guns among them, capable of delivering more than 100,000 rounds per minute. 40 minutes from the target, Thompson noticed it first. Tiny black dots approaching from 2 o'clock high, growing larger by the second. "Bandits, 2 o'clock high, multiple contacts," he called. Davis responded instantly. "Blue flight, engage. Red and yellow, stay with the bombers." Through his gun sight, Thompson counted at least 20 German fighters, a mix of Messerschmitt 109s and the more formidable Focke-Wulf 190. They were diving from 30,000 feet, using their altitude advantage to build speed. Inside the lead German fighter, Hauptmann Otto Fönnekold of Jagdgeschwader 54 felt confident as he led his 12 experienced pilots toward the American formation. With 58 confirmed victories, Fönnekold was among the Luftwaffe's respected aces. He had shot down 7 B-17s in the past month alone. "Remember, attack from the front and break up their formation," he instructed his pilots. "Force the escorts to choose between chasing us or staying with the bombers." Fönnekold narrowed his eyes as he recognized the distinctive red-painted tail surfaces of the American fighters. Intelligence had mentioned this group, but he dismissed the reports as exaggeration. Aerial combat was the domain of Germany's warrior class. He couldn't imagine colonial subjects presenting any real challenge. Goering himself says, "American fighter pilots are like chess players who have only learned to move the knight," he reminded his formation, referring to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring's dismissive assessment. "They only know one attack pattern." The German fighters rolled inverted and dove toward the bomber formation. Their tactic was well practiced, a high-speed frontal attack that would split the bomber formation, followed by individual passes from multiple directions that would overwhelm the defensive firepower and escorts. What happened next stunned the German pilots. Instead of reacting predictably, either pursuing the attacking fighters or bunching closer to the bombers, the red-tailed P-47s executed a complex defensive maneuver. 4 fighters climbed to intercept the diving Germans, while 8 others positioned themselves in a weaving pattern above the bombers. The remaining 4 dropped below, creating a 3-dimensional defensive shield. Fönnekold had never seen American escorts maintain such disciplined formation tactics. Before he could adjust his approach, his cockpit exploded with the sound of heavy machine gun fire. Tracer rounds streaked past his canopy as Lieutenant Harold Brown's P-47 engaged him head-on. In the high-speed pass, Fönnekold instinctively pulled up, breaking off his attack on the bombers. 2 of his wingmen weren't as fortunate. One Messerschmitt took multiple hits, smoke pouring from its engine as it fell away. The second suffered wing damage that sent it spiraling out of control. "Mein Gott!" Fönnekold swore as he banked hard, trying to get a visual on the red-tailed fighter that had disrupted his attack. "These cannot be the same Americans we faced last week." The sky erupted into swirling combat. Unlike previous encounters where American fighters often chased German aircraft away from the bombers, these red-tailed P-47s maintained position. They fought with disciplined ferocity, always keeping the bomber protection as their primary objective. Colonel Davis's voice remained calm over the radio, despite the chaos. "Remember your training. Stay with your wingmen. Don't chase kills. Protect the bombers." Lieutenant James Wiley found himself facing 2 Focke-Wulf 190 fighters approaching the bomber formation from below. Banking his Thunderbolt hard, he dropped into a near-vertical dive, building speed rapidly. The P-47 could dive faster than any German fighter, a tactical advantage the Tuskegee pilots exploited ruthlessly. As his airspeed indicator passed 450 miles per hour, Wiley leveled off beneath the German fighters. They hadn't spotted him yet. He squeezed the trigger, sending a 2-second burst of 50 caliber rounds into the underside of the lead Focke-Wulf. The German aircraft shuddered as dozens of high-explosive incendiary rounds tore through its fuel tanks and engine. It erupted into a fireball, forcing the second German pilot to break away. "Blue 4, you've got one on your tail," Thompson called out, seeing a Messerschmitt lining up behind Lieutenant Alan Thomas's aircraft. "I can't shake him," Thomas responded, his voice strained as he pulled his P-47 through a series of evasive maneuvers. Thompson didn't hesitate. "I'm on him." Banking hard, Thompson sliced through the air toward his embattled squadmate. The German pilot, focused on his target, didn't notice Thompson's approach until it was too late. A precisely aimed burst shredded the Messerschmitt's right wing, sending it tumbling away. "Thanks, Red 3, Thomas acknowledged. "Just paying you back for last week," Thompson replied. In his Messerschmitt, Hauptmann Furnekold was growing increasingly frustrated. His squadron had lost 4 aircraft in as many minutes, with no bomber kills to show for it. These red-tailed American fighters weren't just lucky, they were demonstrating superior tactical coordination. "Break off and regroup," he ordered. "We'll approach from multiple vectors simultaneously." As the German fighters pulled away to reorganize, Lieutenant Thompson allowed himself a moment's satisfaction. The bombers continued unscathed toward their target, but he knew the Germans would return. 5 minutes later they did, this time with reinforcements. 30 German fighters approached in 3 distinct groups, attempting to overwhelm the American defenders through numerical advantage. Colonel Davis anticipated the strategy. "They're trying to split us up. Maintain discipline. Blue flight, take the high group. Yellow the middle. Red will handle the low group." What followed was perhaps the most intense 15 minutes of aerial combat the Mediterranean theater had yet witnessed. The sky filled with the thunder of engines pushed to their limits, the hammering of machine guns, and the smoke trails of damaged aircraft. The German pilots found themselves increasingly bewildered. These American pilots demonstrated none of the impulsiveness or glory hunting they had come to expect. Instead, they encountered a perfectly coordinated defense that prioritized bomber protection over individual victories. When Germans broke through toward the bomber formation, P-47s seemed to materialize from nowhere, forcing them to defend themselves rather than press their attacks. Inside the lead bomber, Captain Martin Bergmann watched the battle unfold with astonishment. In 31 previous missions, he had never seen escort fighters provide such effective protection. His bomber had returned from its last mission with more than 300 bullet holes. Today, not a single German fighter had gotten close enough to fire effectively. "Whoever these guys are," Bergmann told his co-pilot, "I want them on every mission from now on." The aerial battle continued all the way to the target. As the bombers began their bomb run over the aircraft factory, the Luftwaffe made one final desperate push to disrupt the formation. 16 Messerschmitt 109s dove from high altitude, attempting to split the bomber boxes during their most vulnerable moment. Lieutenant Thompson saw them coming. "Colonel, big bunch approaching from 4 o'clock high," Davis responded instantly. "All flights, intercept course. Don't let them near the bombers during the run." Thompson pushed his Thunderbolt to full power, climbing to meet the threat. The massive R-2800 engine roared as he led 3 other fighters into the path of the German attack. The Americans hit the German formation head-on, their combined 32 50 caliber machine guns creating a lethal wall of fire. 3 Messerschmitts fell immediately, trailing smoke and flames. The German formation fragmented, its coordinated attack dissolving into individual survival efforts. Below, the bombers completed their run unhindered, releasing their devastating payload onto the aircraft factory with precision only possible from an undisturbed formation. As the bombers turned for home, the German fighters made several more half-hearted attacks, but the precision and determination of the red-tailed escorts never wavered. By the time they reached the Adriatic Sea, the Luftwaffe had broken off completely. Colonel Davis keyed his microphone. "Badger lead, Red 1, skies are clear. How'd you make out?" The bomber commander's voice came back with unmistakable appreciation. "Red 1, Bomb damage assessment looks excellent. Factory facilities heavily damaged, and not a single aircraft lost. Whatever they're paying you boys, it ain't enough. Davis allowed himself a small smile behind his oxygen mask. Just doing our job. As the massive aerial armada headed home, Lieutenant Thompson flew alongside Lieutenant Brown, both men physically exhausted from the extended combat, but mentally exhilarated by their success. "We got 3 confirmed, maybe 2 more probables," Brown said over the intercom. "Not bad for an afternoon's work." Thompson nodded inside his cockpit. "It's not about our count. It's about those bombers. All 72 going home. That's over 700 men who'll see tomorrow." Brown was quiet for a moment before responding. "You know what gets me? Back home, some of those same men wouldn't even sit beside us on a bus." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. They were risking their lives to protect men who, in many cases, wouldn't recognize their humanity on American soil. But that paradox only strengthened their determination to excel, to prove through undeniable competence what words alone could never establish. At Ramitelli Airfield that evening, the debriefing session carried a different energy than usual. Intelligence officers from 15th Air Force headquarters had arrived specifically to interview the pilots about the engagement. The 332nd's reputation was spreading rapidly through the theater. Major William Henderson from Intelligence Operations spread aerial reconnaissance photographs across the table. "Gentlemen, bomb damage assessment confirms 94% destruction of the target. Production capacity has been completely eliminated." He looked around the room. More significantly, this was accomplished without losing a single bomber. The nearest squadron's loss rate is 7% per mission. Colonel Davis studied the photographs, his expression professional but unable to completely hide his satisfaction. "Our mission is bomber protection. Everything else is secondary." Henderson nodded. "The bomber groups are specifically requesting your squadron as escorts now. They've given you a nickname, the Red Tail Angels." A murmur of appreciation ran through the assembled pilots. Henderson continued. "We've also obtained interesting intelligence from a captured German pilot. Apparently, Luftwaffe Command has issued special briefings about your unit. They've analyzed your tactics and are adjusting their approaches accordingly." "What are they saying about us?" Lieutenant Wiley asked. Henderson's expression was difficult to read. "The prisoner reported that initially, German pilots were told you were inexperienced replacement pilots who could be easily outmaneuvered. Now they're being instructed to avoid engaging the red-tailed aircraft if possible." The room fell silent as the significance of this information sank in. The enemy had acknowledged their effectiveness, perhaps the most objective validation possible. "There's more," Henderson added. 8th Air Force is requesting your deployment to their theater for bomber escort to Berlin. The loss rates there have become unsustainable." This was momentous news. The Big B, Berlin, represented the most heavily defended target in Europe. Escort missions to Berlin pushed the limits of fighter range and endurance, with hours spent in combat against Germany's most experienced pilots. Colonel Davis straightened his shoulders. "When do they want us?" "As soon as possible. They're losing crews faster than they can replace them." Davis surveyed his pilots. "Gentlemen, opinions?" Lieutenant Thompson spoke first. "They need us, sir. That's why we're here." One by one, the other pilots nodded their agreement. Despite the increased danger, not a single man hesitated. "Very well," Davis said. "Major Henderson, please inform 8th Air Force that the 332nd is prepared to deploy as needed." As the meeting broke up, Thompson lingered behind with Brown and Wiley. The 3 men walked across the darkened airfield toward their quarters, the silhouettes of P-47s standing sentinel against the night sky. "Berlin," Wiley said, breaking the silence. "That's the big leagues." Brown nodded slowly. "You know what my father told me when I joined up? He said, 'Son, you're not fighting for yourself. You're fighting for those who'll come after you.'" Thompson looked up at the stars, thinking of the broader significance of their accomplishments. "It's not just about this war anymore. It's about what comes after. Every bomber we bring home, every German we outfly. It's changing how people see us, not just the Germans, our own people too." The 3 men stopped outside their quarters, aware they stood at a pivotal moment in history, one they were helping to shape through skill, courage, and determination rather than rhetoric or policy. "Whatever happens in Berlin, Thompson said quietly. "They'll never again say we aren't capable." In the darkness, his companions nodded their agreement. The next day would bring new challenges, but they would face them with the confidence of men who had already proven themselves in the ultimate testing ground, combat against an enemy who had initially dismissed them, only to learn a costly lesson about the danger of prejudice. Across the continent, in the German Air Ministry in Berlin, General Major Adolf Galland reviewed the latest combat reports with growing concern. The statistics regarding the red-tailed American fighters could no longer be ignored or explained away. In engagement after engagement, these pilots were demonstrating superior discipline, tactics, and effectiveness. "The Americans are sending this squadron to Berlin next week," Galland told his staff officers. "We must prepare our pilots accordingly." Major Roll, who had been studying the 330 seconds tactics, spoke up. "Their success appears to stem from three factors: exceptional unit discipline, superior situational awareness, and absolute focus on their primary mission of bomber protection. They almost never pursue our fighters once the immediate threat to bombers is neutralized." "And you believe these are indeed the American Negro pilots?" Galland asked. "All evidence supports this conclusion," Roll confirmed. "Our racial theories have led us into a significant tactical miscalculation. These men are not inferior pilots. They may in fact be the most effective escort unit we have yet encountered." Galland turned to the window, looking out at the increasingly threatening skies over Berlin. The war was reaching its most critical phase, with American bombers striking deeper into the Reich every day. And now, escorting those bombers would be pilots who had repeatedly demonstrated they could neutralize the Luftwaffe's best defensive efforts. "Inform all fighter groups," Galland finally said. "These red-tailed aircraft are to be considered elite units. Avoid engagement unless absolutely necessary, and never underestimate their capabilities again." It was, perhaps, the most profound acknowledgement possible of what the Tuskegee Airmen had achieved. Reluctant respect from the enemy they had proven themselves against in combat. The Germans had expected to find easy prey. Instead, they had encountered some of the war's most formidable aerial adversaries. April 2nd, 1944. The sky over Ramitelli Airfield buzzed with activity as ground crews prepared 39 P-51 Mustangs for the next day's mission. The transition from their trusted P-47 Thunderbolts to the newer, longer-range Mustangs had happened quickly after the unit received orders to begin operations with the 8th Air Force. The sleek new fighters gleamed in the Italian sun, each sporting the distinctive red tail that had become both their identity and a symbol that struck apprehension in Luftwaffe pilots across Europe. Lieutenant William Thompson ran his hand along the propeller blade of his newly assigned aircraft, which he had named Duchess after his mother. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine that powered the P-51 was a marvel of engineering, smaller than the Thunderbolt's massive radial, but delivering similar power with significantly better fuel economy. This efficiency translated into an operational range of over 1,800 miles, making Berlin escorts possible without external fuel tanks. "She's a different beast entirely," Crew Chief Master Sergeant Elliot Williams explained as he walked Thompson around the aircraft. "Liquid-cooled inline engine instead of air-cooled radial. More vulnerable to battle damage, but gives you better aerodynamics and range. Top speed is 440 miles per hour, 20 faster than the Thunderbolt, and she's more maneuverable at all altitudes." Thompson nodded appreciatively. "How are the guns?" 650 calibers instead of 8, but you won't notice the difference. 3 on each wing, harmonized to converge at 250 yards, 2,800 rounds total. Williams patted the aircraft's fuselage. "She'll do things your Thunderbolt could only dream about." Across the airfield, Colonel Davis conducted a final briefing with his squadron commanders. The next day's mission would be their first escorting 8th Air Force B-17 bombers all the way to Berlin, the longest, most dangerous fighter escort mission of the war. "The bombers will proceed along this route," Davis explained, tracing the flight path on the map. "We'll rendezvous here over the North Sea, accompany them across occupied Europe, and stay with them all the way to Berlin. Total mission time, 7 hours, 20 minutes. Major George Roberts, commanding the 401st Squadron, whistled softly. "That's pushing the Mustangs to their absolute limit," Davis nodded grimly. Fuel management will be critical. We'll run lean cruise settings throughout. No unnecessary maneuvers, no extended pursuits. What opposition can we expect? Asked Captain Wendell Pruitt. Intelligence reports 300-plus enemy fighters concentrated around Berlin. Jagdgeschwader 54, 26, and 11. They're elite units. They know the bombers are coming, and they know we'll be escorting. Lieutenant Harold Brown studied the map intently. They'll be waiting for us, 700 miles into enemy territory. That's their home turf. Davis fixed his gaze on each pilot in turn. Gentlemen, I won't minimize the challenge. Tomorrow's mission represents the deepest fighter penetration of the war. Many said it couldn't be done, that no fighter could escort bombers to Berlin and back. The 8th Air Force has specifically requested us because of our record, not despite who we are, but because of who we have proven ourselves to be. The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled on them. Our objective remains unchanged, Davis continued. Protect the bombers at all costs. The 8th has been taking unsustainable losses, up to 15% per mission. Each percentage point represents dozens of aircraft and hundreds of men. Thompson raised his hand. Sir, have the bomber crews been briefed about us? A slight smile crossed Davis's face. They know the red tails are coming. Word has spread throughout the theater. Their commanders have told them to expect the best fighter escort in the European theater. That's a reputation we need to live up to, Thompson said. Indeed, now get some rest. Tomorrow we'll test everything we've learned. As the briefing concluded, Thompson sought out Lieutenant James Wiley, who had grown uncharacteristically quiet in recent days. Something on your mind, Jim? Thompson asked as they walked toward their quarters. Wiley hesitated before responding. Got a letter from home yesterday. My younger brother tried to enlist, wanted to be a pilot like me. That's good, isn't it? Wiley shook his head. They rejected him, not because he failed any test, but because they said the experiment with Negro pilots wasn't being expanded. He looked at Thompson with intensity. No matter what we accomplish here, they're still calling us an experiment back home. Thompson nodded slowly. All the more reason to make tomorrow's mission perfect. Results speak louder than any prejudice. Do they? Wiley asked. We haven't lost a bomber in 57 missions. That's a record unmatched by any other fighter group. If that hasn't changed minds, what will? History isn't changed in a day, Thompson replied, but every mission is another piece of evidence they can't ignore. Berlin is the big one. When we bring those bombers back safely, it'll be one more argument no one can refute. Wiley didn't seem entirely convinced, but he nodded. I suppose we're fighting this war on two fronts, against the Germans in the air and against prejudice back home. And we'll win both, Thompson said with quiet conviction. Dawn broke clear and cold over Ramitelli Airfield. Thompson completed his pre-flight checks methodically, getting acquainted with his new Mustang's cockpit layout. The aircraft felt more responsive than his Thunderbolt, lighter on the controls, more like a sports car compared to the P-47's truck-like handling. At 7:15, Colonel Davis's voice came over the radio. All Red Tail squadrons, start engines. 39 Merlin engines roared to life simultaneously, their distinctive purr rising to a thunderous chorus as they warmed up. Ground crews removed chocks and stood clear as the first elements began taxiing. Red Flight, line up for takeoff, the control tower instructed. Thompson advanced his throttle, feeling the surge of power as his Mustang rolled forward. One by one, the fighters took to the sky, forming up in flights of 4 as they climbed northward toward their rendezvous with the bombers. All aircraft. Cruise settings, Davis ordered once they reached 15,000 feet. Set engines to lean mixture, 45% power. Watch your fuel consumption like your life depends on it, because it does. As they crossed the Alps, Thompson checked his fuel gauges obsessively. The Mustang was living up to its reputation for efficiency, but Berlin was still far away. The real test would come on the return journey, especially if they encountered heavy resistance. 2 hours later, they made visual contact with the bomber formation, 154 B-17 flying fortresses in tight combat boxes, already weathering sporadic attacks from Luftwaffe interceptors. Red Tails, this is Badger Lead, came a call over the radio. You boys are a sight for sore eyes. Badger Lead, Red Leader, Davis responded. We'll take it from here. As the fighter group integrated with the bomber formation, Thompson noted the damage several B-17s had already sustained. Gun turrets shot away, holes in fuselages, even an aircraft with an engine smoking, all testament to the gauntlet they had run before fighter escort could reach them. 20 minutes later, Thompson spotted the first major German formation, 40-plus Messerschmitts climbing to intercept. "Bandits, 10 o'clock high," he called. "Red group engage," Davis ordered. "Blue and yellow stay with the bombers." Thompson pushed his Mustang into a climbing turn, feeling the aircraft respond with an agility his Thunderbolt never possessed. Beside him, Brown and Wiley maintained perfect formation as they moved to intercept the German fighters. In the lead Messerschmitt, Hauptmann Wilhelm Hoffmann of Jagdgeschwader 54 watched the approaching American fighters with growing concern. The distinctive red tails were unmistakable. These were the escorts his squadron had been specifically briefed about. "Achtung! Red tails approaching," he warned his pilots. "Remember your briefing. Do not engage directly. Attack only when you have overwhelming advantage." But several newer pilots, eager to prove themselves, broke formation and dove toward the bombers. It was exactly the opening Thompson had anticipated. "3 bandits breaking low," he called, pushing his stick forward and dropping his Mustang into a steep dive. The P-51's superior high-altitude performance gave him a speed advantage the Messerschmitt pilots hadn't expected. Before they could reach the bomber formation, Thompson and his wingmen were on them. Thompson lined up the lead Messerschmitt in his gun sight and squeezed the trigger. A 3-second burst from his .650 caliber machine guns caught the German fighter squarely in the cockpit and engine. The aircraft shuddered, rolled inverted, and plummeted toward the earth 10,000 feet below. The remaining German fighters scattered, abandoning their attack run as more red-tailed Mustangs arrived. The bomber formation continued undisturbed, maintaining the tight formation that maximized their defensive firepower. As they crossed into Germany proper, the opposition intensified. Radar-directed flak batteries tracked their course, filling the sky with black puffs of exploding shells. More Luftwaffe fighters appeared, Focke-Wulf 190s now, widely considered Germany's best propeller-driven fighter. Colonel Davis's voice remained calm over the radio. "All flights maintain discipline. Remember your sectors. We have a long way to go yet." For the next hour, the sky became an arena of swirling combat. German fighters attacked in waves, probing for weaknesses in the escort screen. Each time the Tuskegee Airmen responded with the disciplined, coordinated defense that had become their hallmark. Inside the lead bomber, Captain Richard Walker marveled at the protection they were receiving. "I've flown 12 missions to Berlin," he told his co-pilot. "Never seen anything like this. Usually, we lose aircraft by the dozen once we cross the German border." His bombardier nodded in agreement. "Those red tails are something else. They don't chase kills like the other escort groups. They stay right with us." Walker checked his watch. 30 minutes to target. If they can keep this up, we might actually deliver our payload intact for once. Berlin appeared on the horizon, a sprawling urban expanse now obscured by smoke and the haze of previous bombing raids. As they approached the German capital, the Luftwaffe made its most determined effort yet to break up the formation. 70-plus fighters rose to meet them, including the yellow-nosed Messerschmitts of Jagdgeschwader 26, the Abbeville Kids, Germany's most elite fighter unit. Colonel Davis recognized the critical moment. "All flights, maximum effort. Do not let them disrupt the bomb run." Thompson pushed his Mustang to full military power, feeling the aircraft surge forward as he moved to intercept a group of Focke-Wulfs diving toward the lead bomber element. The German pilots, seeing the red tails moving to engage, split their formation, a clear indication they were now actively avoiding direct confrontation with the Tuskegee pilots. "They're breaking off," Wiley called with surprise. "Stay focused," Thompson responded. "They'll try another angle." He was right. The German fighters regrouped and attempted to attack from below and behind, a tactic that had proven successful against other escort groups. But Davis had anticipated this maneuver, positioning the Blue Flight to counter precisely this approach. Lieutenant Charles Hall, who had become the first Tuskegee Airman to score an aerial victory the previous year, led his flight in a textbook intercept, catching the German formation as they climbed toward the bombers. 3 Messerschmitts fell in quick succession, trailing smoke as they dropped away from the battlefield. Red Leader Blue 3 Hall reported, "Sector clear." As the bombers began their bomb run over Berlin, the Luftwaffe made one final desperate push. 20 Focke-Wulf 190D9s, the latest variant with the powerful Jumo 213 engine, attacked simultaneously from multiple directions. In the chaos that followed, Thompson found himself engaged with a particularly skillful German pilot who maneuvered his Focke-Wulf with exceptional precision. Each time Thompson thought he had an advantage, the German would slip away, using the Focke-Wulf's superior roll rate to change direction. "This guy's good," Thompson muttered to himself, pushing his Mustang through a series of high-G maneuvers that strained both aircraft and pilot to their limits. The German pilot, Oberleutnant Gerhard Meyer, a 22 Victory ace, was equally impressed with his opponent's skill. After 2 minutes of intense maneuvering, neither had gained a decisive advantage. But they had drifted away from the bomber formation, exactly what Thompson had been trained to avoid. With a quick check of his position, Thompson made a split-second decision. Breaking off the engagement, he rolled his Mustang and pushed the stick forward, diving back toward the bombers. Meyer, surprised by the Americans' willingness to disengage from what Luftwaffe pilots would consider a matter of honor, hesitated before pursuing. That hesitation proved costly for the German. As Meyer dove after Thompson, Lieutenant Brown, who had been covering his wingman, positioned himself perfectly. A precisely aimed burst caught the Focke-Wulf's engine, sending glycol streaming from its radiator. Meyer had no choice but to break off and attempt to reach friendly territory before his engine seized. "Thanks for the assist," Thompson called to Brown as they rejoined the bomber formation. "Teamwork," Brown replied simply. "Something they haven't figured out yet." Below them, the bomber formation completed its run, releasing hundreds of tons of ordnance onto Berlin's industrial districts with devastating effect. Massive explosions blossomed across the city as factories, rail yards, and power stations were hit with precision that was only possible because the formation had remained intact. "Bombs away," reported the bomber commander. "Beginning egress. Outstanding work, Red Tails." But the mission was far from over. The most dangerous part still lay ahead. The long journey home across hostile territory, with fuel tanks depleting and German fighters continuing to press their attacks. The Luftwaffe, recognizing this vulnerability, had positioned fresh fighter units along the return route, hoping to catch the American aircraft when they were most vulnerable. As they turned westward, Colonel Davis addressed his pilots. "Reduce power to maximum range settings. We're at bingo fuel already. Maintain defensive positions but avoid extended engagements." Thompson checked his fuel gauges with concern. The combat over Berlin had forced them to use more fuel than planned. The reserve margin was razor-thin now. Any significant detour or extended combat would mean pilots ditching in the North Sea or German-occupied territory. An hour into the return journey, with the German border still far ahead, Thompson noticed his engine running rough. A quick check of his instruments confirmed his fear. The glycol temperature was rising steadily. His Mustang had taken damage during the engagement over Berlin, likely from flak or a stray round that had gone unnoticed in the heat of combat. "Red Leader, Red 3, he reported. "I'm showing high engine temps. Possible coolant leak." Davis's response was immediate. "Can you maintain formation?" "Affirmative for now, but it's getting worse." "Understood. Yellow 4, move to escort position on Red 3. If he needs to abort, stay with him." Lieutenant Robert Jackson acknowledged the order, moving his Mustang into position off Thompson's wing. The gesture wasn't lost on Thompson. No pilot would be left alone, even if it meant risking another aircraft. As they crossed back into occupied France, the coolant temperature continued to rise alarmingly. Thompson reduced power further, trying to baby the struggling Merlin engine. The bomber formation was pulling ahead gradually, but they were over friendly territory now, French resistance-controlled areas where downed airmen had at least some chance of evading capture. "Red Leader, Red 3, Thompson called. "Engine critical, I need to find somewhere to put down." "Roger that," Davis responded. "Yellow 4, stay with him. Get him home if possible." Jackson moved closer. "I see a straight stretch of road about 2 miles south. Looks clear of obstacles." Thompson nodded in his cockpit, already preparing for an emergency landing. "I'll take it. You circle once to make sure it's clear, then continue with the formation. No sense in both of us going down." "Not a chance," Jackson replied firmly. "Colonel's orders. I stay with you." As Thompson banked toward the identified landing site, a new threat appeared. Two Focke-Wulf 190 fighters, patrolling behind the main battle, spotted the vulnerable Americans and moved to intercept. "Bandits 7 o'clock high," Jackson warned. "I'll hold them off. You get that bird down in one piece." Before Thompson could protest, Jackson had turned to engage the German fighters, drawing them away from his vulnerable wingmen. It was a selfless act that embodied everything the 332nd stood for: no man left behind, regardless of the risk. Thompson focused on his emergency landing, fighting the increasingly unresponsive controls as his engine temperature reached critical levels. The straight stretch of road approached rapidly, a narrow country lane barely wider than his wingspan. With no other options, he lined up his approach. The touchdown was rougher than he'd hoped, his Mustang bouncing twice before settling onto the packed dirt. The aircraft rolled for several hundred yards before coming to rest at the edge of a small grove of trees. Remarkably, aside from the damaged engine and a bent propeller, the Mustang was largely intact. Thompson quickly gathered his emergency kit and bailed out, expecting German patrols would be alerted by the aircraft's landing. But instead of German soldiers, he was met by a group of French farmers who emerged cautiously from the nearby woods. "Américain?" one called. Thompson nodded, relieved. "American pilot. Allied forces." The oldest of the Frenchmen stepped forward, speaking in broken English. "We help you. Germans not here now, but will come soon, must hurry." Above them, Jackson's Mustang made a low pass, a final check to ensure Thompson had survived the landing, before turning west toward England. Thompson felt a profound gratitude for his wingman's loyalty, knowing Jackson had risked his own life to ensure his safety. The French farmers quickly led Thompson away from the aircraft, taking him to a small farmhouse hidden in the woods. There, he was introduced to members of the local resistance cell, who would begin the process of returning him to Allied lines through the elaborate escape network they had established. "You are Red Tail?" asked one of the resistance fighters, pointing to a scarf Thompson wore with the squadron's color. "Yes, 332nd Fighter Group." The Frenchman smiled broadly, shaking Thompson's hand with enthusiasm. "We know of Red Tails. German pilots fear you. They say you never lose your bombers." Despite his predicament, Thompson felt a surge of pride. Even here, deep in occupied territory, the reputation of the Tuskegee Airmen had spread. What they had accomplished was becoming known not just within military circles, but among civilians and resistance fighters across Europe. Meanwhile, the main formation continued westward. The mission had been an unqualified success, 147 of 154 bombers returning safely, a loss rate of less than 5% on a Berlin raid where 15 to 20% had been the norm. The bombers had been able to maintain tight formation throughout, resulting in unprecedented bombing accuracy. As the aircraft landed at their bases across England, word of their achievements spread rapidly through 8th Air Force. General Jimmy Doolittle, commander of the 8th, requested an immediate briefing on the mission's outcome. Colonel Davis, standing ramrod straight despite his exhaustion, delivered his report personally. "Sir, the 332nd Fighter Group escorted 154 B-17 aircraft to Berlin and back. 147 bombers returned safely. We lost one fighter during the return journey due to mechanical failure. The pilot is believed to have landed in resistance-controlled territory." Doolittle studied the mission data with evident satisfaction. "Colonel, this is the most successful Berlin raid we've conducted to date. Your group's performance is remarkable." "Thank you, sir. My pilots were simply doing their duty." Doolittle looked up from the papers. "I've reviewed your complete operational record, Colonel. 58 consecutive bomber escort missions without losing a single bomber to enemy aircraft. No other fighter group in this theater comes close to that achievement." Davis remained professionally modest. "We've been fortunate, sir." "Fortunate?" Doolittle raised an eyebrow. "I don't believe in that kind of luck, Colonel. You've established new tactical standards for bomber escort operations. I'm recommending your entire unit for a distinguished unit citation. For Davis, who had endured years of skepticism and outright hostility from those who doubted African Americans could succeed as combat pilots, this recognition represented vindication of the highest order. But he knew the true significance extended far beyond military honors. Sir, if I may speak candidly, please do. My men don't just fight the enemy in the air. They carry an additional burden, the need to prove themselves not just as pilots, but as Negro pilots. They know that their performance will determine opportunities for those who follow. Doolittle nodded thoughtfully. Colonel, based on what I've seen, your men have not just proven themselves equal to the task. They've established a standard others should aspire to reach. I don't care what color a pilot is, as long as he can fight, and your boys can certainly fight. 2 weeks later, Lieutenant William Thompson was returned to Allied lines by the French resistance, completing a harrowing journey through occupied France. When he arrived back at the 332nd base, now relocated to Ramitelli to support 15th Air Force operations in Italy, he was greeted as a returning hero. They said you were either captured or dead, Lieutenant Brown told him, clapping him on the shoulder. Should have known better. Thompson grinned. Takes more than a busted radiator to keep me down. The French resistance treated me like royalty once they knew I was a red tail. Apparently German pilots have been complaining about us by name. Colonel Davis approached, extending his hand. Welcome back, Lieutenant. You missed quite a ceremony. 8th Air Force presented us with the Distinguished Unit Citation for the Berlin raid. General Doolittle said it was the most successful mission they'd run to date. Thompson straightened to attention. Sorry I missed it, sir. You'll have another chance. We've been requested for 3 more Berlin escorts next month. Apparently, the bomber groups are specifically asking for the red tails now. This news spread quickly among the pilots. For men who had begun their journey facing skepticism and outright hostility, this recognition of their exceptional skill and courage represented a profound victory. They had proven themselves not through protest or petition, but through excellence that could not be denied. As Thompson settled back into his quarters that evening, Lieutenant Wiley stopped by to welcome him back. Heard you got the grand tour of occupied France, Wiley said. Thompson nodded. 5 different safe houses in 2 weeks. Met some of the bravest civilians you can imagine. Wiley handed him a newspaper, Stars and Stripes, the military's publication. On the front page was a photograph of the 332nd receiving their unit citation, with the headline, Red Tails Set Escort Record, Negro Pilots Establish New Standard for Bomber Protection. They finally got something right, Wiley said with satisfaction. Thompson studied the article, noting its respectful tone and acknowledgement of the unit's exceptional record. Times are changing, Jim. Slowly, but they're changing. I received another letter from home, Wiley said, his expression thoughtful. My brother, the one who was rejected from flight training? They've reversed their decision. He starts next month at Tuskegee. They're expanding the program. Thompson smiled broadly. See? Results speak louder than prejudice, just like I told you. The 2 men sat in comfortable silence for a moment, contemplating how their actions in the skies over Europe were creating ripples that would reach across the Atlantic and into American society itself. You know what really gets me? Wiley finally said. The Germans. They started out thinking we'd be easy targets. Their whole worldview told them we couldn't possibly be their equals, let alone their superiors. Now they avoid engaging us whenever possible. Nothing changes minds like getting shot down by someone you've been told is inferior, Thompson replied with a hint of irony. Exactly. The Germans learned that lesson the hard way. I'm just hoping folks back home can learn it without paying such a high price. By war's end, the Tuskegee Airmen had established a record unmatched by any other fighter group. The Red Tails flew 1,538 missions and destroyed 261 enemy aircraft. Most remarkably, they lost only 27 bombers to enemy fighters in all their escort missions, the lowest loss rate of any escort fighter group. These statistics, impressive in their own right, carried additional significance because of who achieved them. The Tuskegee Airmen had not merely participated in the air war, they had excelled in it, establishing new standards for tactical discipline and effectiveness. Their accomplishments demolished the prejudiced assumptions that had initially confined them to segregated units and limited roles. After the war, many Tuskegee Airmen returned to an America still deeply divided by race. The same men who had been celebrated as heroes in the skies over Europe often found themselves facing discrimination at home. But the seed of change had been planted. Their undeniable competence and courage had created cracks in the foundation of segregation that would eventually help bring down the entire structure. Lieutenant William Thompson went on to serve in the newly integrated United States Air Force, becoming one of its first African-American instructors. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., who had begun his military career unable to find white officers willing to room with him at West Point, rose to become the first African-American general in the Air Force. The legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen extended far beyond their wartime achievements, influencing the civil rights movement and inspiring generations of Americans of all backgrounds. Perhaps the most telling assessment came from a captured Luftwaffe pilot interviewed after the war. When asked about the red-tailed American fighters, he responded, "We feared them, not because of their aircraft or their tactics, but because of their determination. They protected their bombers like nothing we had ever seen. We began to believe they could not be beaten." The Germans had never expected the Tuskegee Airmen could outshoot the Luftwaffe. Their error was rooted in prejudice, the same prejudice that had initially limited these extraordinary pilots within their own military. But through skill, discipline, and courage, the Tuskegee Airmen had forced both allies and enemies alike to reevaluate deeply held assumptions about race and capability. Their story stands as a powerful reminder that excellence is the most effective answer to prejudice, that actions and results ultimately speak louder than preconceptions. In the demanding arena of aerial combat, where skill and courage are measured in the most objective terms possible, the Tuskegee Airmen had not merely proven themselves equal to the task, they had established a standard that few could match and none could dismiss. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.